Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Martin, and I'm going to moderate this next panel. Our panel is on interdisciplinary, international, and intercultural space education. So the focus of this panel in our discussion will be about the importance of teaching interdisciplinary, international, and intercultural aspects of space education. As the space enterprise continues to grow globally, it is imperative that students are trained in and at least exposed to all three of these important elements. As an example, the International Space University stresses this 3I approach in all its programs. There are over 5,200 ISU alumni from 110 countries, and over 75% of them still are working in the aerospace industry. Some have started their own companies, achieved leadership positions in industry and government. 3 are astronauts, and 6 are or have been heads of space agencies. The ISU network is proven effective to find talent and for our alumni to find aerospace jobs. All 4 of our panelists today are connected with the International Space University. And the way we plan the session is that we'll have our 4 speakers will speak, and then we will have time for question and answer after that. So please put your questions in the chat or on the app, and we will read them out and answer them. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now in the order that they will speak. Angie Buckley is a principal engineer at Aerospace and past dean and vice president for academics and research at ISU. She's going to talk about workforce development and the value of exposure to the 3 I's in space education. Donald James is an author and retired NASA Associate Administrator for Education. And he's going to talk about learning the importance of interpersonal aspects in order to be successful in the aerospace enterprise. Roy Nakagawa is a senior project engineer at Aerospace and past ISU director of the Space Studies program. And he's going to talk about his real life case study and the importance of the 3 I's in career development. And then myself, I am Gary Martin. I am the ISU Vice President for North American Operations. I'm a retired Director of Partnerships at NASA Ames. And I'm going to talk about the International Space University and how it implements the 3 I's educational philosophy and its work to current and how we work on current challenges in aerospace. So with that, I think we'll start right away with Professor Angie Buckley.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks for the introduction, Gary. It's my pleasure to take part in this panel addressing international, interdisciplinary, and intercultural space education. I'll give you just a little bit of background on me. I work at the Aerospace Corporation, and I'm in the Center for Space Policy and Strategy. By training, I'm an aerospace engineer with specialties in control theory, structural dynamics, systems engineering, and my favorite topic, space education. I'm also getting pretty good at space policy given my new job assignment. I've worked on both military and civil space programs, and I spent about 7 years working at the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. I've got a total of 17 and a half years at the Aerospace Corporation, which is hard to believe, but there it is. I've been on their team working across a broad range of defense and space exploration programs. I'm a graduate of the ISU summer program from 1993. I joined the ISU faculty in 1998, and I've had the opportunity to work twice in Strasbourg for extended periods of time. And I've also had the pleasure of directing the SSP, just like Gary and Roy. That's quite a job. A little bit about aerospace. We were established in 1960 as a California nonprofit to operate a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the United States Air Force and now by the United States Space Force. We provide independent, objective analysis that actually spans across the entire space enterprise. We provide decision makers with solutions and information to inform their critical program decisions. Our sole purpose for existence and our sole interest is mission success for our customers. So there's a tremendous amount of energy being put into workforce development these days. It's been a major thrust for us because our areas of expertise cover science, engineering, physics, math, chemistry, as well as a host of other non-technical areas, including space policy and economics and market analysis. So no wonder aerospace is such an avid supporter of ISU. Of course, we're not the only organization looking to hire high-performing, high-potential, energetic people. The space enterprise is in desperate need right now of more technically trained individuals who can serve as subject matter experts in their chosen field. But we very much need broadly educated personnel with both technical and non-technical backgrounds who can work across disciplines and understand that developing space systems involves a whole lot more than designing and building spacecraft, launchers, or ground support systems. Indeed, it's really much more than rocket science. We can't do rocket science without the talent that spans almost every imaginable discipline. And I have to tell you, as an engineer, it was a really rude awakening when I learned that policy always wins, and it does. You can trust me on that one. So individuals who have studied in graduate level programs based on interdisciplinary, international, and intercultural, or the 3I principles, have a real distinct advantage in the space workforce. They understand the importance of being able to effectively communicate complicated ideas across many disciplines to a broad range of stakeholders at many different levels. And most of these people have wildly varying expectations. So it's good to learn how to talk to everyone. Building on your chosen discipline to develop an understanding of cultural differences through working international programs really enhances your ability to excel in our ever more connected world and our ever more connected worldwide space enterprise. It's not just U.S., Russia, China anymore, or ESA. The opportunities are really expanding, and that's one of the drivers for workforce development. Academic and continuing education programs like those offered at ISU, that includes the Space Studies program, Master of Space Studies, Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program that convenes in Australia in the Southern Hemisphere summer, and the commercial space program. Those all build on what individuals have already learned in their undergraduate studies or professional experience, regardless of their specialty, to prepare for current and future space workforce to make significant contributions to advance the rapidly changing global space ecosystem. ISU professional development programs like the Executive Space Course and other short programs that are offered a la carte are also based on the 3I principles. They provide the opportunity to executive level professionals to widen their aperture, if you will, and gain insight into the many elements comprising space programs. From my professional experience, the 3Is have really served me well. As you'll hear from my colleague Roy, it's been the same for him. We find ourselves able to explain to our colleagues some of the cultural nuances that one encounters in international programs. And it really throws your colleagues and your bosses off when you can comfortably move from a conversation dealing with some down in the weeds technical issue to a discussion on how new space policy directly affects current mission direction, and then moving on to talk about strategic or strategies to improve or enhance your acquisition strategy. What's more entertaining for me is when I was working in the Human Exploration and Spaceflight Division, I was able to confidently explain the effects of the space environment on the human body in a very informed way. Of course, people who have backgrounds in medicine who have also had the privilege of going through the 3I learning opportunity, they can surprise their colleagues too by expounding on technical, legal, and programmatic aspects of space. So it kind of goes both ways. There's two other points that I'd like to make regarding workforce development. First point is that the workforce of the future, the development of the workforce of the future absolutely must include what's called in the United States K through 12, and that's all the the grades before you enter college, and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math outreach. It needs to include community outreach and education and training at every single level. You never know too much. There's a lot of emphasis on STEM right now, but being mindful of the 3I philosophy, we need to inspire all young students to study space-related topics, because then they can also experience the wonder and awe of being right there on the front lines. You don't need to be an engineer or scientist to have an amazing career in the space arena. Activities and outreach to inspire the young are critical for the development of a pipeline of highly qualified, motivated future employees. International Space University has set an excellent example of how this can be done through their open doors days on campus, and also bringing space to the public through the activities that they do at various schools in the Strasbourg region, both in France and Germany, and in the Strasbourg City Center. The last point I want to make is the importance of embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only in our workforce, but more fundamentally in our recruitment in undergraduate and graduate programs. It's been shown that diverse teams tend to be much more productive than homogeneous teams. Aerospace has initiated a DEI effort that includes 34 targeted actions across 6 focus areas, because we want to foster a workplace environment where employees can bring their best selves to deliver innovative solutions for our customers. ISU has also done an excellent job of recruiting a more diverse student body, particularly in terms of gender balance. The master's program for the last few years has been approximately 50-50 males and females. This is a hugely important topic, and I personally think it's been overlooked or just simply given lip service for a really long time. And to me, it's just fantastic to see people waking up to the fact that we need to emphasize this in our educational aspects as well as in our professional. So I really appreciate your attention, and I look forward to our interactive question and answer session. So now over to you, Donald.
Thank you very much, Angie. I really appreciate it. And thank you for all of those that are here. I wish we could see you. It's still kind of weird to talk to people, but send me a chat, say hi if you know me. If you don't know me, say hi anyway. I had the privilege of working for NASA for 35 years. And when people ask me, what are some of the highlights of my career, in the top 5 definitely include the honor that I had to lead the effort on behalf of NASA Ames Research Center to host the Space Summer Program at Ames Research Center. This was the very first time that SSP was held on U.S. federal government property. In fact, according to our research, it was never held on any government property anywhere in the world, which posed a lot of interesting challenges. But we were able to pull it off, and I would say it was one of the better SSPs, thanks in large part to Gary's leadership and Angie's leadership and many other people who supported it. When I retired from NASA in 2017, I got a very provocative question from a young intern at a speech that I was doing, and the question was, if I could go back in time and talk to my younger self, knowing what I know now, what would I advise myself? And so I gave him 3 answers, but the one answer I gave him, which is going to be the focus of my short time, was I said I would tell my younger self to remember what his mother, my mother, had always taught me and my brother, that regardless of what we do and regardless of our education and regardless of how much money you have or don't have, just never forget that manners will take you where brains and money won't. And I told that young man that I would actually, and I'm going to share my screen as a NASA person, we have charts. I told that person that I feel and my brother feels that is really an important skill that is not really talked about. And I use the word manners on purpose because many people think it just means courtesies and politeness and things of that nature, and that's true. But I really think it's broader than that. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about making space for manners. I wrote a book with my brother, and the book you can see is floating in his cockpit. This picture was actually taken the day after I retired. My brother arranged with the American Airlines flight operations people to have a trip out of Washington, D.C., and he flew me back to California. That was actually the first time that I was in the cockpit with my brother. So if you look at the upper left-hand part of this chart, my hypothesis is that the majority of us, regardless of our interest and professions, we want to have a fulfilling and meaningful career or life, and we want to enjoy a certain amount of success. And as I see it, and this is just how I see things based on, my years at NASA, as I see it, that there are factors that are involved in that. Clearly, our cultural backgrounds and social economic situation impacts that. Our knowledge, skills, and abilities that we have impact that. Growth and learning and our own personal transformation all impact our sense of fulfillment and meaning in our lives. Our ability to network and take advantage of opportunities, and I would dare say luck we have. But I've certainly had a lot of luck in my career, although I would submit that luck is something that we often create. But my main hypothesis is, if you see at the bottom, is that what I think is really foundational is our manners. And so what do I really mean by that? So even though we talk about the 3 I's in the International Space University context, I think space work at the end of the day is also very interpersonal. I mean, let's face it, unless you are a scientist or an engineer secluding yourself in a box and you just invent things and you don't interact with people, you have to engage people. And how we engage people really does matter. And as I see it, matters include how we communicate, how we listen to people. It includes our verbal communication, the words we use, our voice, our nonverbal and body language, our ability to be empathetic with people, which means really trying to put yourself in their shoes to see something from their point of view. Something very critical when you're working in an intercultural environment. Our behavior is also really important, what we do and we don't do, the commitments we make and the promises we make, and then where are we actually coming from? Are we really being authentic, or are we being disingenuous? Are we putting on an act because we want something? And then what about our history? We might have baggage. We might have been burned early in our careers, or we might have had a bad boss, or we might have had, an upbringing that really wasn't conducive, and so therefore you show up in a way that's challenging. And so all of these factors determine our manner of being, how we present ourselves to other people. And so the question really is, well, if you're trying to work in the aerospace world, or you are working in the aerospace world, well, do our manners really matter? And what I would like to submit with the points that I have on this chart, that these are all things that I have actually seen happen in my experience. For example, it could be the tiebreaker on which a company gets funded by a venture capitalist fund. I've actually, as part of my senior leadership training, worked for a startup company that sought venture capital funding, and it turned out earlier on the team that I was supporting, many of the manners of the CEO and some of the other VPs in the room weren't conducive, and so we had to work on that to change it. Manners can determine who gets hired, promoted, or terminated. My brother, who's an airline pilot, and in the airline industry, it's very regulated, and you would think that if you're just a qualified pilot, that, that ought to work, but he's actually been on interviews where very capable pilots were not hired, and the after-action report revealed that the person's manners is what doomed his particular candidacy. Manners is also a basis for trust. I mean, do you trust somebody, right? If you trust them in a mission, and particularly if you're going to be flying into space, I can't overemphasize from what I've learned from my astronaut friends or the importance of trust with your colleagues. Well, that's a manners matter. It's also important to prevent inadvertent offense. I'm actually guilty of that, particularly in an international environment where I forgot some of my international code of mannered conduct, and I did something inadvertently that I regretted doing because I wasn't sensitive about the person with whom I was talking. It could also mitigate unconscious bias. We're very familiar with unconscious bias about gender and race and sexual orientation and national origin and religion and things of that nature. And so our ability to be self-aware, very self-aware of our actions and intended and unintended consequences. And so lastly, what I would say is that our manners really drive the narrative that is uncommunicated both interpersonally as well as internationally, right? That people make conclusions about other people, they make conclusions about nationalities. I mean, we've heard these things before, oh, it's just the French, and oh, those Americans, and oh, the people from the South. And so we do these kinds of things even unconsciously to ourselves and not recognize that narrative in our head actually drives how we conduct ourselves with people that could actually prove to be not very helpful. So I'm very bullish on the opportunity for particularly early career professionals, and that's what I wrote this book for, was for early career professionals, to invite them to dive deeper into this lens that I'm offering, to see that if we're going to be able to do great and wonderful things in space, particularly now that the commercial space is blossoming and there's going to be a lot more opportunities, that this is an opportunity for people to really shine and do well. And so with that, I will say thank you, and I will stop sharing and turn it over to my friend and colleague, Roy. Thanks.
So Donald, thank you so much, and thank you, Angie. I think you've set a perfect the stage for my talk, which actually does emphasize all of the points that both of you just talked about. In particular, the interpersonal aspect of what you were talking about, Donald, and the importance of manners. Even though I don't have, I mean, Donald, you presented the manners part, so I think we've covered that aspect of it there. But what I like to do is bring the focus onto how the 3 I's, and I would say 4 I's if you include interpersonal, and how that's guided my entire career essentially. Starting with my major, actually, if you could indulge me. I started off thinking that I was going to be the next Einstein and major in theoretical physics, but then when I literally failed my special relativity course in college, I said, well, maybe that's not something for me. And so I turned to engineering, but I didn't really know which engineering. So I looked at, the 2 multidisciplinary engineering fields, and one was called ocean engineering, and the other one was called aeroastro. And so I picked ocean because we knew a little about the ocean, but also it's a lot easier to be a sailor than to become an astronaut. So I picked ocean engineering. And in retrospect, that wasn't a bad choice because I don't know if anybody knows, but the first commander of the very first International Space Station construction element, first element launch actually it was called, was a retired Navy SEAL captain, Bill Shepard, who got a master's degree from the same ocean engineering program that I got my bachelor's in. So on to my career, I started off, I would argue that every aspect of my career, every change, every decision I made was heavily influenced by my interdisciplinary background. And starting with even the research and development lab that I was working for, a large Japanese shipbuilding company, I went on to get a master's degree in marine engineering at the University of Tokyo, which is also very interdisciplinary. I ended up applying for and getting accepted to a training program to work offshore oil and gas reservoir prospecting work for a company called Schlumberger. But then I got laid off before I could even go out there because the oil prices tanked around that time. So I ended up deciding to go back to the United States, and the main interesting thing that was going on in the ocean area was the Navy. And so I worked at several naval shipyards working on overhauls of nuclear submarines, cruisers, and carriers. But then the company I was working for got together with Grumman Corporation, and we bid on a technical support contract for the space station program. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not that interested in space. I don't have a background in space, but at least I knew that the Japanese were heavily involved as a major partner on space stations. So I just applied for the jobs, fortunately got it. When the Space Station Freedom program almost got canceled in Congress, and Dan Golden took over and said, well, we're going to bring the Russians in to our partnership, and that essentially saved the program at the time. But they moved the program office from Northern Virginia to Johnson Space Center in Houston. So I made the switch to become a NASA civil servant at that point and joined the International Partners Office to work the Japan desk, even though that was more of a policy programmatic job as opposed to an engineering job. But as it turns out, as I suspected, that was much more interested in the engineering part. I mean, sorry to the engineers, but I thought that the coordinating with the international partners was quite interesting, at least for me. And then my NASA boss pulled me aside one day and he said, well, you have solid engineering background, but you really don't know a whole lot about space, which is unacceptable for working in an organization like NASA in his mind. So he actually sent me to the International Space University for one of these space studies programs. And it was in Stockholm at the time that he recommended I go. And I said, well, how can I say no? So, but again, in retrospect, it was a truly life-changing experience because it not only just opened up my eyes to space, but the whole interdisciplinary, international, intercultural aspects really changed the course for the rest of my career. And when I returned, I got assigned to be the NASA Space Station liaison at the Jackson Scuba Space Center. And then I was later loaned out to ISU, and I actually went back to ISU and directed, like Gary said in his introduction, the Space Studies program in 2000. And I can tell you a side story about Angie saving the session later, but if I have time, but in the 2001 session in Germany. So that's how I became very close part of the ISU community. All of my fellow panelists, as Gary said, are from ISU in one way or another, related. And then, all of us can say that we have, by virtue of being part of ISU community, we have, colleagues and friends and whatnot at maybe 25, 30, even in some of these cases, over 40 friends and colleagues in 40 plus nations. So it's really quite an experience. And just to reemphasize what Donald said about interpersonal, it's really enabled my career. Ever since going to ISU, I went from NASA to working for ISU, and that was, of course, through my connections with ISU. And then even going from NASA to work for Caltech and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory on robotic missions, and that's why you see the rover in the background. That was through an ISU colleague that I had met through ISU. And then after leaving JPL, I ended up joining a small robotic spin-off company called Alliance Space Systems, and that was through an Alliance alumnus member. And then from there, McDonnell Dettweiler's Associates of Canada acquired Alliance Space Systems, and many people from ISU were part of the McDonnell Dettweiler's Associates. And then even beyond that, when I first joined the aerospace culture, of course, Angie was with aerospace, I think at that time, but it was an ISU general manager at aerospace who actually hired me on to aerospace. So and now I'm a space guardian of all things. But anyway, enough about my career. I just want to make sure that I touch upon the international part. Because there are certain aspects of the international relationship we have in space regarding policy, law, regulations. All of those things are very important. And policy often drives, national priorities, and I would argue that almost all countries are concerned about national security and industrial development for their own for their nations, and that kind of drives the policy. The law aspect is really important because each nation obviously is a sovereign state and have their own rules. But what's interesting about knowing about international, intercultural, interdisciplinary is that each nation has their own and reliance on law, and the United States relies heavily on legal frameworks. But if you work with countries like Japan and Russia, they put less of an importance on the legal language and more on building individual trust in relationships. And so you've heard of Japan. Most of the most important deals are cut over sake at izakayas or on the golf course. I mean, that's very common. But also in Russia, I just want to relate a very quick story about a colleague of mine at NASA who went over to Moscow for one of the earliest meetings he had with his Russian colleagues. And he had all these documents ready to be signed on the bottom line. And he presented that document across the table to his Moscow colleagues. The Moscow colleague looked at it, set it aside, and put up his hand and said, whoa, let's get to know each other first. And he actually reached down below his desk, the table, and brought a bottle of vodka in front of him and said, let us have a drink. We'll get to know each other before we dive into business. So that's a very interesting and important aspect of how different countries have their own way of doing things. Even in terms of regulations, right? I worked for McDonald Detweilers, which is a Canadian company, and I was my title was a director of technology and fusion, which meant that I was in charge of importing robotics technology from McDonald Detweilers. I mean, they were very advanced because they had developed the Canadarm, and they were global leaders in robotic space technology. So my job was to bring that technology to bear when we went after U.S. Customers, such as the Department of Defense, which was very interested in that type of technology, as well as NASA. So, but that was allowed because Canada doesn't have a very strict export control regulation like we do. We would never be able to export any kind of sensitive technologies like that to any foreign country, even to Canada. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you consider international differences. And then engineering is totally different, right? So even in the engineering approach, the U.S. Their approach to mission assurance, independent. You have to have a body of independent people to scrutinize the engineer's design and work, because that's the best way to catch issues and problems, to have like a third party person perspective. Whereas the Russians, they don't have that. Their view of mission assurance is that every engineer is responsible for the safety, reliability, mission assurance, quality. Everything is the responsibility of the design engineers themselves. So they say, their attitude is, why do you need somebody to look over your shoulder who doesn't know as much as about your design as you do, because you're the ones that's designing it. You should know more than anybody else, and you should be able to ensure that your design is sound. So there's some very, very interesting dynamics there. Let me just wrap up my talk by hitting on intercultural, which is arguably one of the most interesting of the 3 or 4 I's. There's the two sessions that I managed for the International Space University. One was in Chile and the other one was in Germany. So I just want to emphasize the big difference between Latin culture and the Germanic culture. In Chile, the host country organizers were like, don't worry, be happy, everything will be fine. And of course, as you might guess, nothing ever turned out the way according to plan. So that's a sort of like a stereotype, if you will, of the Latin culture. But then in Germany, it's the complete opposite, right? You come up with a proposal, a plan, they look at it, so it's, no, that's crap, that's not going to work. Let me tell you how it's going to be done. And they force, their plan on you. And of course, everything actually goes according to that plan, because the Germans are very strict about that, but it's not the plan that you wanted. So it's a very interesting interchanging culture there. Of course, food is a very important part of culture. I can tell you many stories, but just two that stands out during the two sessions that I was involved in. In 1999, Thailand hosted the International Space University Space Studies program. And the German students in Thailand in mid session got so tired of eating rice and noodles that they actually almost had a riot over not being able to eat potatoes. And so the host site actually made a very special arrangement to have this huge shipment of frozen French fries to deliver to Thailand. And then one day the cooks made this huge amount of French fries, and it was gone in 5 minutes, I'm telling you. But ever since then, they didn't complain as much. So that was interesting. In 2001, it was the opposite, right? 2001 was in Bremen, Germany. And then all the non-German students got so tired of eating 5,000 different ways of making potatoes that they said, there's got to be other food besides potatoes. And so what happened was that they took over the kitchen one day, the international students who are not from Germany, and they actually cooked the different cuisine. Like the Chinese students cooked Chinese food, the Italian students cooked Italian food. Everybody cooked not everybody, but all the different countries that were willing to cook their own different cuisines, and everybody was happy after that. There's a very interesting language. Language is a very obviously very important part of culture. There was an interesting story that I'd like to relate during my space station days with NASA. During a very contentious meeting about power resource allocation on space station at the Johnson Space Center, there was a liaison guy from Japan named Tanaka-san who blurted out, "Baka janai no," which essentially means, "Are you all stupid?" And so this is very uncharacteristic of Japanese people in such a setting, right? They're usually very harmonious, and they don't like to disturb the peace. So when he said that, all the other Japanese people that are in the room knew I spoke Japanese. So their faces turned blue, and they looked at me. All of them all at once turned and looked at me and said, "Oh my God, I can't believe he said that, because that's going to be very offensive." But it was funny because the NASA negotiator responded right away and says, "I don't know what you said, but that sure didn't sound like a compliment," and everybody laughed, and it was over. So it was very interesting. But what I'd like to say about this story, and I'd like to end this here, is that an important takeaway is that, beware of stereotyping, because just because you think that the Japanese are very quiet and cooperative and they're not that way. They're actually not. They're human beings. They get mad. They cuss all the time. I mean, So the point is that everybody's different, and at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And so interpersonal, as Don said, I would argue maybe actually the most important eye. So it's the 4 eyes. So anyway, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Gary to bring us home. Gary, thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. And thank you to all the panelists, because you brought up so many great points of the learning that we do at the International Space University. And I'm going to actually show a few charts if I can make that happen. Let's see. If not, I won't. Is it going to work? Let's see. Yes. Then I do this. There. Hopefully you can see these charts. The International Space University, all these things that you've been hearing about this morning, we try to pull them all together. I'm also, I retired from NASA. And while I was at NASA, I found that the people who were the alumni of the International Space University had a much broader look at what was going on in space. And not only that, had contacts with people all over the world who could get information for me in the studies I was running that I couldn't get really through proper channels, quite frankly. And I at least get a lot more insight into what was going on in the space programs around the world. And so I found out that the ISU is a very unique organization. There's nothing like it. I've looked for other organizations that might be similar to collaborate with. As I said, I'm the Vice President of North America Operations right now. And we do collaborate with quite a few organizations around the world, but there are none that are an international NGO like we are, and who bring people we have this vision, the vision that was put out by the founders of peaceful, proper, prosperous, and boundless future through the study of exploration and development of space for the benefit of all mankind. And as I go through these charts, you'll see that we have participation from leaders around the world, because that's what we are. We're an NGO. We're not a for-profit. We're not a political organization. We're not trying to do anything but bring people together because we want to see space developed. We want to see space science. We want to move forward. We want these things together. And so it was one of the founders called us the ISU when they made it. It was a beacon for people around the world who wanted to spend their careers or change their careers to be in space, to find each other so that they could work on space activities collaboratively in the future. So we have this diverse student body from an experienced international faculty. I'm going to show you a little bit about that with an interdisciplinary understanding and this intercultural. So we try to get all these things together, and there's a number of other I's that we can, but we do it through experience, through teaching and having people experience things so they can learn very deeply. We found that we are trying to create leaders and people who work in the aerospace industry, who are be decision makers, as well as good engineers and scientists. By coming together, it gives them a competitive edge. And over 75% of our alumni work in the space sector. And a lot of people come to us because maybe they're an engineer already, but they don't do space and they really wanted to do space. Or they're an engineer who's really interested in policy aspects and want to learn more about how they can do space policy and space law, and just want to explore that for a while in different courses that we have. And then they can decide if they want to stay where they are or do something different in the space sector. And once the people come and take one of our courses, then they understand the network. And once they understand and can use the network, it helps them reach out and collaborate in the future. What we've taken, you can split space. If you look at holistically at everything going on in space, you could split it up any way you really want to, depending on, what point of view you have. Here is currently how we see it. We take everything that's going on in space globally, and this includes, policy and humanities even, and like science fiction writing, as well as ethics and human performance in space and engineering. So we put it all into these bins so that we can track it as we try to do holistic education, so that people get a piece of all of it, or the important pieces and understanding of each of these areas. These are the programs, our major programs, and I'm just going to tell you quickly about a little bit about them. They're the Space Studies program, which you've heard about. 3 of us have been directors, and actually Donald was really the director on the NASA side for SSP09. It's a 9-week program that we do in different places all over the world once a year, usually in it's always in the Northern Hemisphere summer. Then we have a Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program, which is 5 weeks. We do in collaboration with the University of South Australia in Adelaide. We have the Master of Space Studies. It's a 1-year program at the central campus. However, there's an option. You can add an extra year of research or an internship as part of that master's. We have the Commercial Space Program. It's a 6-week program at the Florida Institute of Technology in Melbourne. And then we have the Executive Space Course, which we do in different places around. In fact, we're doing many, many more of these. Some are specialized and some we do every year. We do a week in Strasbourg every year. We also do the same in Seattle, Washington. And then we go around. If people ask us to come and bring our expertise and our faculty to talk about space, we do that. Just to give you an idea, you heard Roy talk about Stockholm. It's on this list somewhere, and 1995. And then you can see that what we're trying to do is go out around the world so that people understand that there's an organization, or that understand that there's this network they can hook into to do their collaborative activities in the future. And we're still we have many other places to open up and talk about space. One of the things we do, and I'm going to talk about how we do this experience through one of the tools we use, which is called a team project, which in most of these courses, like the master's course and the SSP listed here, we do for the entire course. Even though it's a 9-week course, you start kind of small in the beginning, but you end with the team project finale. Same with in the master's program. And so our participants and students are from all over the world. They're from all different countries, and they have all different kinds of disciplines. Some are even we've had, doctors and lawyers, of course, and then we have performance artists and musicians and people who just want to know about space and take it back to their own discipline that they're doing. It's very exciting to have these people because there's so much energy, and they came again because they were so excited about space. They wanted to work in this area and learn more about it. And so these team projects, we give them a one-page write-up and say, you need to look at, for instance, what we just did this summer, in orbit mobility and manipulation. And we were looking at, okay, we have these aspects of this project and this challenge about what are we going to do with all these small spacecraft, and how can we use them better, and what are the things that people who are doing space industry should be looking at. And the students define actually what the project is based on the one-pager we give them. And they have to organize. They have to figure out how they're going to manage themselves. How are they going to make decisions? And how are they going to meet the milestones we set up for them? This is really hard. I mean, these people don't know each other. It's like setting up a project team in a few weeks with people you don't even understand what their capabilities are. And what this does is it shows people the cultural differences, the diversity in knowledge and expertise differences, and how people operate, and just even in the same culture, how they operate. And it gives you this experience that's internal, that has really helped people through the rest of their careers. It's unbelievable. In fact, many people who have been through these experiences talk about how it changed their lives. And I believe it really has. We also at ISU, we do these, we have done some space payloads on the space station to try to show the master students especially how you put a payload together, what a project is, how do you get the data, all the aspects of doing things in space. So we have a little piece of that going. I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of people we have in the organization and have been part of the organization. These are our chancellors. It started with Arthur C. Clarke, who met the 3 founders. And it was really his gravitas that brought many people to the very beginning that became part of our faculty, experts from around the world who wanted to be part of this experiment in this new way of doing education and trying to bring the world together on this subject. Then we had Jean-Jacques D'orda when he was the DG of ESA, and he was very supportive of everything we did, and certainly inspirational in his visions. And Buzz, he takes students to another level when he speaks, and they just get excited about what could be the future. And then most recently, Pascal Ehrenfreund, who's now the president of the International Astronautical Federation. And she's also, I'm happy to say, our new president at ISU. Very inspirational and brings together this global look of what's going on in space around the world. But these are the people who really make it up. So we have 160 space experts in space-related disciplines from countries all around the world, all different disciplines. We have a core group of faculty at the central campus who are our core, especially for the masters, but also teach in many of the other programs I just showed you. And they know what's going on in space, what are the current trends. And many of the professors we have, and I just have a group here that I took off one of the pages because not all 160, of course. But what it does is these are the people who are actually doing the work. The people who come and teach at ISU are people who are making policy and doing the work. For instance, well, Jim Green is the chief scientist at NASA. And Jeff Hoffman is an MIT professor and astronaut. And John Logston, hopefully, maybe you've heard of him before, but he writes policy from GWU and very knowledgeable. But these are just some examples. We have so many that we could put up here. These are the countries that our students and participants have come from. You see, we are striving to want to fill this map in totally, and hopefully we reach that someday. But the interesting thing here is that we're going into this commercial aspect of space. 110 startups have been founded by ISU alumni in 27 countries. I think I'm very, very proud of that. As I said earlier, over 75% work in space. And you can see here that some are in space agencies, some are in companies, big, large and small, and science. And so some of them have been the heads of space agencies, some of our, after they've gotten out of our program, and some of them are still currently. We've had 3 astronauts. 2 of them, Jessica Muir and Jim Newman, came to ISU before they became astronauts. So Yen heard so much about ISU after she was an astronaut, has become a member of our community and teaches often. Here's just a smattering of some of the new starts that have happened at ISU, made up by ISU, founded by ISU alumni. You probably, hopefully recognize some of these. And then here's what I wanted to leave with, is that because of what we give an informal access to these leaders around the world because they want to come and be part of our programs. They want to meet the participants and the students and meet the other faculty when they come, come for a week or so at one of our programs and network. And these networks are so important to collaborations, as Roy talked about. I mean, if you can get on the phone and call somebody in another organization or another country, and because you've had a joint experience and you have some shared goals that you have, then you're already off on the right step for a potential collaboration. And we expose the students to this international intercultural learning in a way that they can really understand in a deep way how you interact with different cultures, how you interact with different disciplines, and the aspects that were brought out here about from different nationalities. So we provide this holistic picture to give these important insights and look at current trends, because we bring in every year, each program is different. These are not set programs. Every one is kind of handmade. And because it has to do with what are the current trends that are going on around us. And so I'm very excited about how that is done. It's not a static program. And with that, I think we're interested in hearing your questions. And if we don't have any questions, we will ask ourselves questions.
Hi, Gary. We do have a few questions.
Excellent.
So I'll start with a question from Delisa Ellis. She says, I'm a junior in the Space Studies program at APU. I really enjoyed your session. I would like to ask, do you think I will be able to find an engineering job with this degree with a concentration in aerospace science? When looking online, it is hard to find information.
Angie, would you like to start with that?
I had a feeling this was coming my way.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Gary. Well, first of all, I have to tell you, I'm sorry, I don't know which APU you're talking about. So anyway, I think it's possible depending on the details of your curriculum. I had a very good friend and colleague who worked as an engineer who actually had a degree in physics, which might be comparable. But I think you have to look for job openings that match what you want to do and then apply. I doubt you're going to find a job rec for aerospace science. You're probably going to find one for an aerospace engineer or some kind of specialist. But what you can do is just apply, and then fix your resume in such a way that it looks like you really want to go into the technical areas. That would be the advice I would give you. And then if it turns out that maybe you need a little more polish, take some additional courses, go to the SSP, and I just say apply. Don't be afraid to apply for an engineering position just because your degree says something else. Over.
Great. We have another question from Sumita Gaurav. She asked a two-part question. How important are immersive experiences for the 3I approach, and how is it working out in virtual settings?
I can speak a little to that, and then maybe other people would like on the panel would like to add in, especially the virtual settings part. COVID hit us pretty hard because, as you can hear from our discussions and the examples we gave, much of our learning was in person. We wanted people to not only work together on these teams and in these classes, but also eat and go out together at night and build very strong bonds. And so what we had to do under COVID was create new formats where we created our first one last summer, not this summer, but the one before during COVID, where we did a completely online session for the SSP. We called it the ISP. And we tried to build in, how do we get the networking in there? And I personally was skeptical that we could do a lot of that. But what we found was that it is possible with a lot of the new tools and putting time into it. That not only like Zoom, but there's networking and social tools where people can get together and have a discussion with the people they saw and what can ask questions and things like that. And when we asked people later if they were able to get these bonds, we found many of them not only were able to do that and with some quality. And so that I think ISU has worked really hard to try to jump that and make it work. And not only that, we found a whole new niche of people who were interested in taking our programs online because they couldn't get away. They were so happy that now they could get this learning at home because either they had a new kid or there's just no way they could leave their job for 9 weeks or 6 weeks. Anyway, that's a really good question. And anyone else would like to add?
Gary, I just like to add that everybody's different, like I said in the last part of my presentation, and that goes for the immersive 3I experience too. I mean, people react differently to that, right? Some people actually might be turned off by it and they never, have anything to do with ISU ever again. So it's not as if it's a magical place where everybody, becomes an instant part of the community either. However, for those people who are sensitized to the value of 3Is, they will immediately get it, I think, in an immersive setting like the space studies program. You get as much out of this ISU immersive experience as you put into it. So if you react positively, you're going to want to put a lot of yourself into it, and you'll get that much back. Just like you said, Gary, I think there's some people that want to never want to be disengaged. They want to be engaged all the time. I mean, look at us, right? We're all still participating in a bunch of ISU activities. But you know, there are people that my classmates who I've lost touch with and who, you know, don't even mention that they went to an ISU session or anything. I mean, it's all different.
Great.
Okay. Oh, Donald?
Yeah, I don't have any. I retired before all this happened, so I mean, I'm old-fashioned. I like interpersonal, but I think what Roy said is something that we're learning, which I value, and that is this may be an opportunity to be more inclusive for those people for whom the type of environment that ISU typically produces is not something that they like, but they could still add value to a program or a mission. And so I certainly respect that. I know I've enjoyed the fact that I can connect with a lot of people globally where I haven't been able to before because I wasn't traveling. But I think we have to. What I like about the question is it causes us to rethink what do we mean by immersive, and so I appreciate the question, and I think we ought to keep examining that.
Thank you. We have another question from Kevin Weger. He asks, have the panelists had any difficulty working with international partners and dealing with government technical export restrictions, and have they caused friction with partners?
Who would like to take that? Angie, I see. All right.
I can take that. I haven't, I mean, I've worked a lot with international, but I've never had really any issues because I know there's sometimes issues with ITAR material and things like that and not being able to share fully information, but there are steps you can take to mitigate that. It's just you have to pay attention to the rules. You can't just walk in and have a meeting. If you pay attention to the rules and follow the procedures, talk to who you're supposed to talk to, and make sure you've got all the agreements in place, things go really well. I'm working on a project right now with the United Kingdom. And granted, they're one of the 5 I countries, but still we had to get all of our agreements in place and decide what information we could exchange and all that. And it's going quite well. I've worked with companies all over the world. And again, as long as you follow the rules on both sides, it's not just the US side, it's the other country's side too. You can do pretty well. I have heard horror stories of things falling apart just because of, you know, ITAR restrictions and they were really crippled to the point they could not do the project. But, you know, again, if you work at it, you can generally find a way to make it happen. But you got to pay attention to the rules or you get your fingers ticked. So. Over.
Yeah, if I could piggyback on what Angie said, when I was associate administrator for education, I attended all of the IAF meetings, International Astronomical Federation meetings, and at one meeting I was approached by a senior a Chinese leader after his presentation about their upcoming space station project. And he told me that he was very interested in working with, you know, American education and having students in the United States being able to fly payloads and interact with astronauts and all that. Now, personally, I thought that would be a great thing. But I knew that, you know, this whole notion of the United States dealing with China and space is one of those hot button things. And so, you know, I had to use my best manners through the translator to communicate that I would be delighted to communicate the interest to my administrator and, you know, and we'll take a look at that. I mean, that was about as best I could do without basically saying there's no way in hell this is going to happen. In fact, I didn't even bother telling the administrator because I knew what the answer was going to be. So, you know, that gets back into what Angie said earlier about the whole policy thing, right? So you have to know if you're representing a country, you have to know the policies that you're dealing with. But at an interpersonal level, it doesn't mean you have to be belligerent if your countries are not playing nice to each other. It means you just have to find a diplomatic way to say something that's truthful without causing, you know, an international incident. Like you know, the head of the Chinese program right in the minute. Your guy said we could do this, and now you're not doing this. You know, that would be what we call in the work world a career limiting moment. So, yeah, it can be tough. And so the friction was really, how do I answer the question without being offensive, knowing that the answer is going to be no way in hell. Even though I personally like the idea, and I still do, you know. And now I can say that because I'm not in the government anymore. So.
I want to squeeze in one last question for our last 3 minutes from our Katie Mack. What about later life folks getting engaged into the space program?
I'll take the first one on that. And that, because I see a lot of the participants that come in, and we get people at all ages, many people in their 50s, even in their 60s, because they're excited about space and they wanted to know more about it. And they want to meet this community and maybe contribute in whatever discipline that they've been doing. So there is no age. In fact, when we always add eyes, we look at this intergenerational aspect, where we have people just coming out of their bachelor's all the way into the later life careers. It's very exciting because they become mentors in both ways. Anything else to add? Anyone else?
Well, since I definitely qualify as later in life, I'll say that I actually have a secret fantasy of actually taking an SSP for real as a student, even though I had a lot to do with managing the program from the NASA side. I was actually never a student and had to struggle through the TPs and enjoy the culture nights as a participant rather than as an organizer. And the way I view it is, number one, I never want to stop learning. I never want to stop knowing more. I love being around people from different countries, particularly younger people. And I know now I have something to contribute back, which is, you know, part of what my purpose in life is. So I would say it never ends. Space is for everybody.
And do we have time for another one, or are we out of our time, Angelique?
We are right up at the end. So actually, that was all the questions. So we're pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do want to thank all the panelists for their time and effort in putting forward such great, I found very interesting stories because we hadn't gone through all these things together in detail. So I thought it was, I found it myself very interesting. So thank you all very much. And thank you, Angelique, for making this possible.
Yeah, thank you, Angelique. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
No, thank you so much, Gary, Angie, Donald, and Roy. Thanks for participating. I really enjoyed this session and hope you check out some of the other sessions. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.